The rain doesn't warn you in Seattle. It just arrives. Gray and quiet, pressing down on 42 floors of glass and steel on a name stamped in gold above the clouds. A name worth billions. A name the whole city knows. Below it on the wet pavement, a girl in a jacket too thin for the cold. One backpack. Sneakers that had already given up. Looking up at the building like she was trying to decide something. She went in anyway. Inside a room with windows that touched the ceiling. A table long enough to swallow everything she owned. Strangers in suits that fit. And a lawyer reading from a document calm as weather. Then he turned to her. Slid a small envelope across all that marble. $1. The room laughed. She didn't. She folded that dollar carefully, pressed it over her heart, stood, walked out without a word. Nobody in that room understood what they had just handed her. The rain in Seattle doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. Gray all morning. Then the sky opens quiet and cold. No thunder, no warning at all. Sabine Rourke stood at the bottom of a glass tower and watched the water start to fall. 42 floors of steel and light above her head, and her down here, in sneakers that had given up somewhere around the left toe, in a jacket too thin for a girl who was about to be told exactly how little she was worth. She was 22. She owned one backpack, 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, and a letter that made no sense. The letter had come from a law firm downtown. Heavy paper. The kind of paper that costs money just to hold. It said she was required, to attend the reading of a will. The will of a man named Alistair Sterling. She'd never met him. She'd never met anyone if you wanted the truth of it. That was sort of the whole thing about Sabine. No parents, no family, no last name that had ever meant a single thing to a single person. But the letter came with a bus ticket and an address, and so she went. Because when you have nothing, you go where the free bus ticket takes you. The lobby was marble. Her sneakers squeaked against it. Somewhere in the ceiling there was music playing so soft, it was almost a rumor. And on the wall in gold the name. Sterling. The same name that was stamped on half the skyscrapers in the city if you knew where to look up. She did not look up. An elevator carried her 42 floors into the sky without asking her permission, and then a hallway, and then a room. The room had a table longer than any table she'd ever eaten at, longer than the whole kitchen in the group home. Strangers sat around it in suits that fit. Assistants moved along the walls without sound, and the windows. God, the windows went from the floor all the way up to the ceiling, and the whole gray city lay out there like something you could reach out and take. Sabine sat down and became very, very aware of her sneakers. The lawyer began to read. One by one, the fortune went out. Properties, shares, millions of dollars in words she didn't understand sliding across the table toward one man. And then the lawyer turned. To her. To Sabine Rourke, he said. Even voice. No cruelty in it, which somehow made it worse. He slid a small envelope across all that marble. Mr. Sterling leaves $1. The room went quiet. Then somebody laughed. She looked down at this envelope. Inside was a single dollar bill. Old, soft at the folds, the kind of dollar you'd get as change at a gas station and never look at twice. And somewhere in her chest, something hot rose up. Not anger. Older than anger. It was the feeling she'd carried her whole life, sitting in waiting rooms, standing in donation lines, watching other kids get picked first every single time while she learned to make herself small enough to disappear. The leftover, the one nobody counted. She'd been swallowing that feeling for 22 years, so she swallowed it now. The man who laughed sat at the head of the table, silver hair, gray suit that had been sewn to his exact shape, a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than every car in the group home parking lot combined. He had the easy face of a man who had never once, not for one single night, lain awake wondering about money. Roland Sterling. She didn't need anyone to tell her the name. It was there in the jaw, in the way he owned the room without trying, in the photographs down in the lobby that she'd walked past with her chin down. Roland laughed again, softer this time, almost kind, which was the worst part. $1, he said. He shook his head, delighted. Well, the old man always did have a sense of humor. A few of the other strangers chuckled along, polite, the way people laugh when the boss laughs. Sabine said nothing. She looked at the dollar. She folded it once, then again, and she slid it into the inside pocket of her thin jacket, the pocket over her heart, though she wasn't thinking of it that way, not yet. Then she stood. The chair scraped, loud. Everyone looked at her. "Thank you for your time," she said. Her voice did not shake. She made sure of that, and she walked out. Behind her, 42 floors above the city, a fortune kept being divided. Towers, bank accounts, a name that meant something to everyone in America, except the one girl it actually belonged to, and Sabine walked out with $1. The rain hit her the second the glass doors slid open. It soaked through the thin jacket in about a minute. She pulled it tighter anyway. Old habit. As if the gesture alone could keep a person warm. The street was full of people who knew exactly where they were going. Umbrellas, taxis, a man in a long coat barking into his phone about a deal that could not wait. Headlights smeared yellow across the wet pavement. She walked. No umbrella, no taxi money. Just a bus ticket for the ride home and one folded dollar that a dead stranger had decided she was worth. And as she walked, she did the math. She was 22 now, which meant the system was done with her. Long done. No more group home. No more monthly check. No more caseworker who forgot her birthday 2 years running but always remembered to bring up her grades. What she had was this. A studio apartment over a laundromat in South Seattle. A part-time job stocking shelves at night. $311 in a coffee can. And Milo. The thought of the boy did something complicated to her chest. Worry and warmth all tangled up and impossible to pull apart. Because Milo was the only thing in the whole world that was actually hers. Not by blood, not by paperwork, by something stronger than either. She pulled her collar up and kept walking through the rain. Somewhere above her, the Sterling name glowed gold against the gray sky lit up on the side of a building. She didn't look up at it. The next morning, Seattle woke under the same gray blanket. The apartment over the laundromat was small enough that Sabine could touch 2 walls with her arms out. The heater rattled like it was thinking about quitting for good. The paint peeled in the corners, and it smelled always faintly of dryer sheets from the machines running downstairs. But it was warm, and it was hers. She sat at the little kitchen table with a paper bag from the corner store. Inside the bag was 1 loaf of cheap white bread. That was breakfast. That was, if she was being honest with herself, most of breakfast for the foreseeable future, until the next paycheck cleared. Across from her sat Milo, 9 years old, skinny in the way that worried her, messy brown hair that no comb had ever won a fight with, and eyes too big and too watchful for a kid that age, the eyes of someone who'd learned early how to read a room, how to know when the grown-ups were about to start yelling, how to know when it was time to go invisible. She knew those eyes. She'd had them once. Still did some mornings in the mirror. She tore the loaf in half, slid the bigger piece across the table. "Eat," she said. "You've got school." Milo frowned at the bread, then at her. "You take the big half. You had the fancy meeting." "Trust me, it wasn't that fancy." "Did you get money?" "Eat your breakfast, Milo." "That's not a no." "Eat," he grumbled. But he ate, and she watched him eat the way she always did. Made sure the kid got enough. That was the rule. The one rule Sabine had made for herself the day she talked the system into letting Milo stay. Provisional guardianship. Temporary on paper. A trial run, the caseworker had called it. Like Milo was a car you took out for a test drive. The boy had been bounced from home to home for 2 years before he landed in front of her. Nobody wanted a 9-year-old with a temper and a file thick with red flags. Nobody except Sabine, who'd looked at him and seen herself at that age. Angry, because the world had handed her every reason to be. So she'd stepped up, 22 years old, broke, part-time job, studio apartment. She'd stood in front of a judge and a social worker and she'd made her case. And somehow, on a provisional basis with monthly check-ins and a stack of conditions, as long as her arm, they'd let her keep the boy. It wasn't permanent. Not yet. The hearing for permanent guardianship was 2 months out, and Sabine knew exactly how it would go. If she showed up looking unstable, looking poor, looking like a kid raising a kid in an apartment that smelled like a laundromat. She didn't let herself think about that too much. She just made sure Milo ate. He was halfway through the bread when headlights swept the window. She looked up. A black SUV had slid to a slow stop on the street below, the kind of car that did not belong on this block, the kind of car that in this neighborhood usually meant trouble of one flavor or another. Her stomach tightened. Then came the knock. 3 times. Even. Patient. She stood, put herself between the door and Milo without quite meaning to. Another old habit. "Stay there," she said quietly. She opened the door and froze. A tall man stood in the hallway. Charcoal suit. Older, maybe 60. Silver hair cut close. A face that gave away nothing. And calm eyes that had clearly seen a great deal and decided a long time ago to keep most of it to themselves. She knew him. The lawyer. The one who'd read the will. The one who'd slid the dollar across the marble. "Good morning, Miss Rourke," he said. Courteous. Even. He'd said his name yesterday somewhere in the blur of marble and humiliation. She hadn't caught it. "Ambrose Vane," he said now, as if he'd read the question off her face. "I was Alistair Sterling's attorney. May I come in?" She didn't move for a second. Because none of this made sense. Because rich lawyers in expensive suits do not show up at apartments over laundromats. Because the will had been read. The dollar had been handed over. The joke was complete. There was no reason for this man to be standing in her hallway. Except here he was. "It's not much," she said, finally stepping back. "But come in." Ambrose Vane stepped inside. His eyes moved across the room. The peeling paint. The rattling heater. The half a loaf of bread on the table. The skinny kid sitting very still, watching the stranger with 2 big eyes. He took it all in, and his expression did not change. He didn't wince. He didn't pity. He just looked the way a man looks when he is recording something he intends to remember. Then he turned back to her. "Miss Rourke," he said, "we need to talk about that dollar." She crossed her arms. "If you came all the way down here to explain the joke, you can save it. I got the message, loud and clear, yesterday." Vane shook his head. Once. Slow. It wasn't a joke. Something in the way he said it made her go quiet. He reached into his coat, pulled out a slim folder, set it on the kitchen table right next to the bread, as if the 2 things belonged in the same world. "Your grandfather," Vane said careful, "was a very strategic man." She blinked. "My what?" "Your grandfather." "I don't have a grandfather." The words came out flat, automatic. She'd said versions of that sentence her whole life. "I don't have parents. I don't have family. I don't have anybody." You learn to say it without flinching. "Alistair Sterling," Vane said, "was your grandfather." The heater rattled into the silence. Milo had stopped chewing. Sabine stared at the lawyer, waited for the punchline. It didn't come. "That's not possible," she said. "It is entirely possible, and it is true." Her voice caught. She hated that it caught. She forced it level. "Then why? Why would he leave me $1, if I'm his?" She couldn't say the word. Granddaughter. It wouldn't come out. "Why $1? Vane opened the folder, slid a single document across the table toward her, because leaving you nothing at all would have been a mistake. A legal one. He tapped the paper with one finger. If your name had simply been absent from the will, your uncle could have argued you were forgotten. An accidental omission. In probate law, that opens a door. It can trigger a challenge. Years of it. He tapped the paper again. $1 is not an accident. $1 proves your grandfather knew exactly who you were, that he chose. He looked up at her. The dollar isn't an insult, Miss Rourke. It's a lock. On a door. It keeps your uncle out. She looked down at the document. She understood maybe half the words, legal language dense as wet concrete, but she understood the shape of it, and the shape turned her stomach over. Wait. She looked up. My uncle. You mean the guy who laughed at the table? Roland Sterling, Vane said. Yes, your father's brother. My father. The words landed somewhere deep and old, because Sabine had spent 22 years with a blank where a father should be, a file folder with almost nothing in it, a last name that it turned out hadn't even been the right one. You knew my father, she said slowly. I knew him. And for just a moment something moved behind those calm eyes, something that might have been grief, held very carefully in place. Your father was a good man, Miss Rourke. I'd like to tell you about him. A pause. But not here. Not like this. Then why bring me there at all? The question came out sharper than she meant it. Yesterday. The will. If the dollar was just a legal trick, why drag me into that room? To get laughed at? You could have mailed it. I could have. Then why? Because Vane said quietly, that wasn't the only will. The room went still. She felt it before she understood it, the way the air changes right before something breaks. What? Vane reached into his briefcase and drew out a small object, set it on the table. A key, not a house key, heavier than that. Old metal dark with age, the kind of key that opens something meant to stay closed. This morning, Vane said, if you're willing, we're going to take a drive, somewhere your uncle doesn't know exists. He paused. Somewhere your grandfather wanted you to see. Sabine looked at the key, then at the lawyer, then at Milo, who was staring at all of it, with his mouth slightly open, his bread forgotten in his hand. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to be careful, because good things did not happen to girls like her, because when something looked too good, it was usually a trap with the jaws still open, because hope in her experience was just the setup for the next disappointment. She'd learned that lesson early. She'd learned it hard. But she looked at this key, and she thought about the blank space where her father should be, and she thought about a grandfather she'd never known choosing her with one folded dollar. I have to take Milo to school first, she said. It was not a yes, but it wasn't a no, and Ambrose Vane almost smiled. An hour later, she sat in the back of the black SUV as it pulled away from the laundromat and left the city behind. She'd dropped Milo at the elementary school 6 blocks over, watched him walk through the gate, watched him turn around, twice, to look back at the strange black car, like he was memorizing it, like he was afraid it might carry her off somewhere he couldn't follow. I'll pick you up at 3, she'd told him. Same as always. Promise. 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 And she meant it. She always meant it, because promises were the one thing Sabine never broke. She knew exactly what a broken promise felt like, from the inside. Now the city thinned out around the highway. Towers gave way to neighborhoods. Neighborhoods gave way to trees. The road climbed up into the forested foothills east of Seattle, where the evergreens grew tall and close and blocked out what was left of the sky. Ambrose Vane sat across from her. Quiet. He hadn't pushed, hadn't filled the silence with small talk. She appreciated that more than she could have said. Finally, she spoke. Tell me about him, my father. Vane watched the trees go by for a moment. "His name was Julian," he said. "Julian Sterling. He was the younger of Alistair's two sons, and he was, in my opinion, the better of the two by a very wide margin. What was he like? Patient, honest to a fault. He had a way of listening that made people feel heard." A faint, sad smile. "Alistair used to say Julian was the only person in the company who could deliver bad news and somehow make you grateful for it. He was being groomed to take over. Everyone knew it, including his brother." Her hands had gone tight in her lap. "What happened to him?" Vane didn't answer right away. "That," he said at last, "is a conversation for a different room. There's a letter. Your grandfather wrote it for you, in his own hand. He wanted you to hear it from him, not from me." He looked at her. "We're almost there." The road narrowed, then narrowed again. It left the highway and became a long, private drive, unmarked, easy to miss. The SUV slowed. Tall iron gates stood across the road, half hidden by snow-dusted pines. The driver leaned forward, keyed a code, and the gates swung open without a sound. And there, at the end of the drive, Sabine forgot how to breathe, because it was not a house. It was a palace made of glass. It rose out of the white valley like something dreamed, taller than a cathedral, a vast dome of glass and slender white iron, arching up and up against the wall of dark pines behind it. Thousands upon thousands of panes, each one catching the low gold light of the afternoon and throwing it back so that the whole enormous structure seemed to burn softly from the inside, warm, glowing, in the middle of all that cold, white nothing, and inside the glass, green. She could see it even from here. Impossible green. Leaves and vines and the dark shapes of trees pressed up against the panes from within. A living, breathing garden, in the dead heart of a mountain winter. The snow lay soft and untouched all around it, and the glass palace glowed above the snow like a lantern, the size of a church. She just stared. Through the car window, her mouth open. "This was his," she said quietly. "He called it Aurelia," Vane said. "His private retreat, off the books, held through a trust that has nothing to do with the rest of the estate. Roland doesn't know it exists. No one does, outside of two people." He looked at her. "Myself. And as of this morning, you." The car stopped. They got out. The cold hit her lungs clean and sharp. Nothing like the wet gray of the city. Her scuffed sneakers crunched into snow that had probably never held a footprint, and she felt very strongly that she did not belong here, that at any second someone would come out and tell her there'd been a mistake, that she should leave, the way she'd come. But someone did come out, and she did not say leave. A woman stood at the top of the glass steps, older, 70s maybe, silver hair pinned back, a heavy wool coat, and a face lined by weather and years and something gentler than either. She stood very still and watched Sabine climb out of the car, and then her hand rose to her mouth. "Oh," the woman said, soft, almost to herself. "Oh, you have his eyes, Julian's eyes." Sabine stopped at the bottom of the steps. "You knew him too." "I held him when he was a baby," the woman said. Her voice caught. "I've kept this house for 40 years. I kept it for you, child, though I never once got to tell you so." She wiped her cheek with the back of one hand and steadied herself the way strong women do. "Margaret, my name is Margaret, and I have been waiting a very long time for you to walk up these steps." Sabine didn't know what to do with that. 22 years of being the leftover, and now a stranger on a mountain weeping, because of her eyes. She climbed the steps. Margaret led her through the great front doors of glass and iron, and inside the warmth wrapped around her like a held breath. The garden rose up on every side, ferns taller than a man, orange trees heavy with fruit, roses climbing white trellises toward the glowing dome overhead, warm, damp, alive, the smell of green things growing. In the middle of winter, in the middle of snow, Sabine walked through it slowly, and without deciding to, she reached out and touched the leaf of a fern, just to know it was real. It was real. And something in her chest, some cold, locked thing she'd been carrying for as long as she could remember, went very quiet, because she'd never had a place for her hands, never had a thing to tend. And here was a whole living world, glowing under glass. She didn't have the words for it, but her hands knew. Her hands wanted to stay. Vane and Margaret led her on, through the garden, through quiet rooms full of books and dark wood, the smell of cold stone and old fires, down a staircase into a study buried in the lower floor of the palace under all that glass and green. It was a beautiful room, shelves floor to ceiling, a stone fireplace cold, now dark with old ash, a heavy desk, and there in the center set into the floor on a raised stone base a large steel safe. Vane crossed to it, took the old metal key from his coat. "Miss Rourke," he said, "what you're about to see, your grandfather kept it hidden for a reason. Once you know it, you can't unknow it." He looked at her. "Are you certain you want to?" Sabine looked at the safe. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The dollar was still folded in her jacket pocket, right over that pounding heart. She thought about every closed door that had ever been shut in her face, every room she'd been told she wasn't allowed in, every time the world had decided before she even spoke that she didn't get to have what other people had. And now, here was a door, and a man holding out the key, and telling her it was her choice. "Open it," Sabine said. Vane fit the key into the lock, turned it. A heavy click, the sound of something old giving way, and the door of the safe swung open. Inside, neatly arranged, stacks of sealed envelopes, bound documents, account statements. She leaned closer, and the numbers on the top page swam, then resolved, then stopped the breath in her chest. $50 million, held in trust, tied to accounts she didn't understand in a language she didn't speak. But the number was clear enough. 50 million. Her breath caught. She took an unsteady step back. "That's not," she started. "That can't be." "It is," Vane said, simply. But before her shaking hand could rise toward any of it, Vane held out something else first. A single envelope, older than the rest, the name on the front written in a careful, old-fashioned hand. Sabine. Just her first name. Nothing else. As if the man who'd written it had known her. As if they'd been close. As if she had been someone in this man's life all along, and not a stranger who'd been laughed out of a conference room the day before. Beside the envelope tucked in the corner of the safe sat one more thing, small, almost lost among the money. A little glass vial, and inside it, a single seed. "He asked me to give you the letter," Vane said quietly. "Before anything else, before the money, before the rest of it. He was very clear about the order." Sabine took the envelope. Her hands were not steady. She noticed that distantly, the way you notice something happening to someone else. She broke the seal, unfolded the page, and read the first line. "Sabine, if you are reading this, then Ambrose has done his job, and I am gone, and we have run out of time to meet. I'm sorry for that. The fault is mine, and I will explain it, though I doubt any explanation will be enough." She glanced up. Vane stood near the wall, hands folded behind his back, giving her space. Margaret stood in the doorway, her hands twisted together, watching Sabine's face like it was the only thing in the room. Sabine looked back down and kept reading. "Your father was the best of us. I do not say that to flatter the dead. I say it because it is true, and because I spent too many years failing to say it while he was alive. I meant for Julian to have everything. Your uncle knew that. And your uncle made certain it never happened." Her chest tightened. "Years ago, there was the deal Roland arranged carefully, so that when it collapsed, the debt did not fall on him. It fell on your father. Roland buried Julian in it, quietly, cleverly. By the time I understood what had been done, the damage was finished. Your father lost everything. His standing, his name in this family. And not long after, in the dark place that ruin pushes a good man toward, I lost him too." She read that line 3 times. I lost him too. She felt the old weight press against her ribs, the blank space where a father should have been. She'd grown up with whispers in a thin file, and a feeling she could never name. And now, in a dead man's handwriting, the shape of it was finally clear. Her father hadn't abandoned her. Her father had been destroyed. And then a paragraph she was not ready for. "I knew about you." She went very still. "I have known about you since you were 3 years old. I know how that will land. It means I knew where you were, and I left you there. In the homes, in the system, year after year. And I let you believe you had no one." Her hand started to shake harder. "He knew," Sabine said out loud. Her voice came out strange. "He knew about me." Margaret made a small sound in the doorway, but said nothing. Sabine read on, and the next words broke something open in her. "I want you to understand why, even if you can never forgive it. Roland destroyed his own brother for money. I had no doubt none what he would do to a child who stood between him and an inheritance. If I had claimed you, if I had brought you into this family and given you my name, I would have painted a target on your back that I could not protect you from. Not from a hospital bed, not from the grave. So I made a choice, the hardest choice of my life. I kept you hidden. I kept you poor and unknown and safe." She kept reading. The words blurred and she blinked them clear. "I reached toward you the only way I dared. The home where you grew up received funding for years that it never knew the source of. The shoes on certain children's feet. The roof that did not leak. The greenhouse in the yard where you spent your afternoons, the one they could never explain how they afforded. That was me. Reaching for you across a distance, I did not have the courage to close. I told myself it was protection. Perhaps it was only cowardice wearing protection's clothes. You will have to be the judge of that. You have every right to hate me. I would not blame you." Sabine's eyes were burning. She would not cry in front of the lawyer. She would not. The greenhouse. She remembered it. A little glass room in the corner of the group home yard. Warm when everything else was cold. She'd spent whole afternoons in there as a child, her hands in the soil. The only place in that whole gray life where nobody yelled and nothing hurt, and green things grew just because she cared for them. He had built her that, from a distance, because he could not come close. 22 years of believing she was nobody's, and the whole time somewhere up in these mountains, an old man had been watching, choosing to stay away, telling himself it was love. Was it? She didn't know. She honestly didn't know. It felt like love and abandonment, tangled so tight she couldn't pull them apart. Except she knew something about that, didn't she? Because wasn't that exactly what she did for Milo? Every single day. Went without so the kid could have. Made hard, quiet choices and never told him the cost. Loved someone by carrying the whole weight alone where they couldn't see it. The thought arrived sideways and knocked the breath out of her. Maybe she understood her grandfather better than she wanted to. She kept reading, and the handwriting changed in the last part. Firmer, steadier. The hand of a man who had stopped apologizing and started giving instructions. Here is what I could not do, and what I am asking you to do in my place. For the last years of my life, I watched Roland hollow out the company I built with my own hands. I could not remove him without tearing the whole thing down and putting thousands of livelihoods at risk. He is very good at making himself impossible to remove. But he made one mistake. He never accounted for you. You are outside his reach. He does not even know your face. The 50 million in this safe is yours, but it is not a gift. It is a tool. I am asking you to use it, to take back what he stole, to take control of Sterling Holdings, and to do for that company and for the people in it what your father would have done if he had been allowed to live. She turned the page. Her hands had stopped shaking. They'd gone steady the way they did when there was a job in front of her that needed doing. You have 30 days. 30 days from the reading of the will. 30 days to gain controlling leverage over Sterling Holdings. Ambrose will guide you. He is the only man left in this world I trust completely. If you succeed, everything I built is yours to set right. If you fail, if the 30 days pass and Roland still holds the company, the trust dissolves, the money is gone, and he wins. For good. And then, near the very bottom, one more thing. Set apart from the rest. There is one more matter, and it is the hardest, and Ambrose will tell you when the time comes. Your father's death was called an accident. It was not. I could never prove it. But I know what my son was, and I know he did not do what they said he did. Somewhere there is a truth about how Julian died, and I ran out of years before I could find it. Perhaps you will not, but I could not go to my grave without writing it down. He did not leave you willingly. Someone took him from you. Sabine lowered the letter, slowly. The room was very quiet. The fire was cold. Outside the high windows, snow drifted down through the pines, soundless, endless white. Not an accident. Someone took him. She stood there holding the letter from a grandfather she would never meet, with $50 million at her back and a folded dollar bill over her heart. And she tried to understand what was being asked of her. 30 days, she said finally. Her voice was rough. I'm 22. I stock shelves at night. I can barely read half the words on these papers. She gestured at the open safe. And he wants me to take down a company, a real company, from a man who's run it for years. Ambrose Vane stepped forward at last, out of the shadow by the wall, into the gray light from the windows. Yes, he said. That's insane. It is a great deal to ask, Vane agreed. Possibly too much. Your grandfather knew that. He wrestled with it for a long time before he wrote those words. He paused. But he also knew something else, and so do I. What? Vane's calm eyes met hers. Roland Sterling has spent his entire life facing people who had something to lose. Rivals with reputations, partners with families, board members with pensions. He knows exactly how to find the thing a man is afraid to lose, and squeeze it, until the man does what he wants. A small pause. He has never once in all those years faced someone with nothing left to lose. Sabine said nothing. He doesn't know your name, Vane went on quietly. He doesn't know your face. He laughed at you across a table and has already forgotten you exist. He thinks the only thing that came between him and the whole fortune was a single dollar and a joke. Vane let it sit. He has no idea what your grandfather just handed you, and he has no idea who you are. Margaret spoke then from the doorway. Her voice was low and it did not waver. Julian used to sit in that garden, she said, when he was no bigger than your boy, hands in the dirt, patient as spring. He'd tell me a seed doesn't argue with winter. It just waits. And when it's ready, it comes up through the frozen ground, like the cold was never even there. She looked at Sabine. You have his eyes. I suspect you have more of him than that. Sabine looked down at the letter in one hand. Then she reached into her jacket with the other and took out the folded dollar bill, unfolded it, looked at it. Old and creased and ordinary. A lock on a door, Vane had called it. But it was more than that now. It was the first thing her grandfather had ever given her. Proof in soft worn paper that an old man up in the mountains had known she existed and had reached toward her the only way he dared. Too late. Too quietly. But real. She thought about her father, buried in someone else's debt, taken and called an accident. She thought about the 22 years of cold. She thought about a man named Roland Sterling, laughing across a table, who had hollowed out everything good in this family and never once paid for it. And she thought about Milo, skinny Milo with the two big watchful eyes, who got bounced from home to home because nobody wanted a kid with a temper and a file full of red flags. Milo, who had 2 months until a judge decided whether Sabine got to keep him. Milo, who deserved a world where the people who hurt children did not always win. Something settled in her chest. Not anger, past anger now. Something colder and clearer and steadier than she had ever felt in her whole life. She folded the dollar back up, slipped it into the pocket over her heart. "Okay," she said. Vane raised an eyebrow. "Okay, teach me." Sabine looked at the open safe, at the stacks of paper she couldn't yet read, at the little glass vial with its single seed, at the impossible thing her grandfather had asked of her. "Whatever this is, however it works, teach me. We've got 30 days. And for the first time since Sabine had met him, Ambrose Vane smiled, a real one, small but real. Something almost like pride moved behind the calm. "Your father," he said quietly, "would have said exactly that, in exactly that voice." Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth and turned toward the window so they wouldn't see her face. Outside, the snow kept falling. The glass palace glowed gold above the white valley. And somewhere down in the city, 42 floors above the streets, Roland Sterling sat in an office that wasn't really his, running a company he had stolen with absolutely no idea that the girl he had laughed at the day before had just decided to take it all back. The clock had started. 29 days to go. The lessons began the next morning, and they did not stop. Ambrose Vane moved Sabine up to the glass palace for the duration. It made sense, he explained. The work needed privacy. The work needed quiet. And the work needed to happen somewhere Roland Sterling would never think to look. So Sabine packed her worn-out backpack again. 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, 1 folded dollar over her heart. But this time she wasn't going alone. Because there was Milo. She'd thought about it for all of 1 second. The boy was not staying behind in a studio over a laundromat while she disappeared into the mountains for a month. Not happening. Not ever. So Milo came too. New school enrolled inside a week. A small one down in the foothills town. And a long, quiet drive there and back every single morning that Sabine made herself. No matter what. No matter how little she'd slept. Because she'd promised. And Sabine did not break promises. The palace had more rooms than she could count. Milo picked the one with the window that looked straight out at the pines. First night, the kid stood at that window for a long time, just staring at the snow, like he didn't trust it to still be there in the morning. She knew that feeling. She stood in the doorway and watched the boy watch the snow, and she didn't say anything, because some things you just let a kid have. Then the work swallowed her whole. Every morning before the drive to Milo's school and after the drive back, Vane sat her down in the study buried under all that glass, and he taught her a world she had never been allowed near, a world that ran underneath the one everyone else lived in. He didn't do it with charts. Sabine had braced for charts, for dense pages of numbers that would make her feel stupid all over again, the way school always had. But Vane didn't teach that way. He taught the way Margaret gardened. "Most people think a company is owned by whoever holds its stock," Vane said one evening, tapping a single page with one finger. "That's what they want you to think. It's simpler that way." A pause. "It isn't true." "Then who owns it?" "Whoever it owes." He leaned back. "Stock is the flower, Sabine. It's loud. It's bright. You buy a big handful of it, everyone in the room turns to look." He set the page down. "Debt is the root. Debt is under the soil where no one looks. And when a company is leaning on enough of it, the person who holds those roots can pull the whole thing over, quietly, in a single afternoon." He looked at her. Buying flowers gets attention. Buying roots gets control. Sabine wrote that down. She wrote everything down. Because here's the thing. Nobody had ever known about Sabine Rourke. She was smart, not school smart. School had been a place she survived, not a place she shined. Too many moves, too many new classrooms, too many nights worrying about the wrong things to ever care about a worksheet. The system had stamped her average and moved right along. But the system had never once put a thing in front of her that mattered. This mattered, so she learned fast, faster than Vane expected. And Vane did not expect much from anyone. The girl soaked it up like dry ground in the first rain, asked questions that made the old lawyer stop and think, saw the pattern 3 steps ahead of where he was pointing. By the end of the first week, he caught himself explaining a thing only once, where he'd planned to explain it 3 times. Your father learned the same way, Vane said the night that happened. Once was enough for him, too. Sabine didn't look up from the page, but something in her warmed and ached, both at once. Margaret helped in her own way. She didn't understand the debt or the shells or the leverage, but she understood people. And she understood Sabine, who was running herself down to the bone and forgetting to eat. So Margaret cooked. Big warm meals that filled the glass kitchen with steam and the smell of butter and thyme. And she set a plate down in front of Sabine every night, whether Sabine asked for it or not. You can't tend a garden, Margaret said one night, if you let yourself go to seed first. Sabine ate the food, and late when the study was dark and Vane had gone to bed, sometimes Margaret would come sit with her and tell her about Julian. Small things. The way he'd once cried over a dead sparrow for 3 whole days. The way he gave his lunch away so often the cook started packing too. The way he laughed with his whole face, no holding back, like the world had never once given him a reason not to. You do that, Margaret said one night. When you forget to be careful, you laugh just like him. She reached over and touched Sabine's hand, just for a second. I thought I'd never see it again. Sabine didn't have words for what that did to her, so she just held on to the old woman's hand for one more second than she meant to. By the end of the first week, they were ready to make a move. A small one. A test. There was a stretch of distressed debt tied to Sterling Holdings, a bundle of old loans the company had taken on years back for a project that never delivered. The loans were worth less than their face value now, which meant they could be bought cheap, which meant whoever bought them would suddenly hold a piece of paper that said, Sterling Holdings owes me. We start here, Vane said. Small, careful. We learn how it feels before we risk anything that matters. Sabine nodded. Her heart was pounding. She'd never had more than $300 in her life. And now she was about to move real money. Serious money. Her grandfather's money. She should have felt powerful. She felt sick. Because what if she got it wrong? They needed help to do it right. Vane knew people. But Vane was known, and being known was dangerous now. They needed a face that wasn't connected to either of them. A financial consultant who could move quietly, place the buys, keep Sabine's name off everything. Vane made some calls, discreet ones, and a name came back, recommended through a contact Vane trusted. Elias Marchetti, sharp, confident, younger than Sabine expected, maybe mid-30s with the easy polish of a man who'd learned which fork to use a very long time ago. He drove up to the palace in a car that cost too much for the road and shook Sabine's hand with a grip that was exactly firm enough. So you're the mystery client, Elias said, smiling. Don't worry, mystery is my specialty. Sabine didn't smile back. She didn't trust easy charm. She'd grown up around too many adults who smiled right up until the second they didn't. But Elias was good. That much was obvious inside the first hour. He knew the market's cold. He knew which sellers were quietly desperate and which were only pretending. He walked Sabine through the first purchase of distressed debt with a steady, practiced hand. And when it was done, when she sat there holding a piece of paper that said a sliver of Sterling Holdings now answered to her, Elias leaned back and grinned. Welcome to the table, kid. And for one dangerous second, Sabine let herself feel it. The feeling lasted exactly until the second deal. The second deal was bigger. Elias was the one who pushed for it. A larger bundle of bonds he said available at a price that would not last. They had to move quickly. They had to move now. Sabine hesitated. Something about the speed of it. Something about the way Elias kept glancing at his watch. But the numbers looked right, and the clock was ticking. 22 days left now, the math always running somewhere in the back of her skull. So she leaned toward yes. She leaned toward yes. And Ambrose Vane, who had been quietly reviewing the paperwork in the corner the whole time, stood up. No, Vane said. The room went still. Elias turned, the easy smile still on his face. I'm sorry. This deal. Vane held up the document. His calm voice had gone very flat. These bonds, where did they come from? Distressed seller, motivated. I told you it won't last. Who is the seller? A pause, just a beat too long. A holding company, Elias said smoothly. Nothing unusual. Shell structure. Everyone uses them. Vane set the document down on the desk, tapped one line. This shell traces back to an entity I recognize, an entity set up 4 years ago. He looked up. By Roland Sterling. The room stopped breathing. Sabine looked at the paper, then at Elias, then back at the paper. These aren't distressed bonds for sale, Vane said, still in that flat, terrible calm. These are bonds Roland moved into a shell himself. He's not losing them. He's planting them. If Sabine buys these, she isn't gaining leverage. He looked up. She's handing Roland a tracing line straight back to the mystery buyer. She's exposing herself, with her own money. Sabine's stomach dropped through the floor. She turned to Elias. Slow. You are going to walk me into that. Her voice came out quiet, too quiet. Elias's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes did. I don't know what he's talking about. Shells cross-connect all the time. It's the nature of... Stop. Sabine stood up. Just stop. And here's the part she would think about later. In the dark. She didn't yell. The old Sabine would have yelled. The group home Sabine. The girl with the temper. The one who'd learned that the only way to be heard was to be loud. That Sabine would have flipped the table. But this Sabine just stood there, cold and clear, looking at the man who had smiled at her and called her kid and tried to feed her to the wolf. You're working for him, she said. For Roland. Elias said nothing, which was its own answer. How long? Silence. How long, Elias? The smile finally slid off Elias Marchetti's face, and what was left underneath was just tired, a man who'd been caught, and knew it, and had been caught before. The contact who recommended me, Elias said quietly. He works for Roland too. You were never going to hire a stranger off the street. Roland made sure the only road to a consultant led through one of his people. A small, bitter shrug. You walked into the only door that was open. He left it open on purpose. Sabine felt the ground shift under everything. The first deal, the easy success, the welcome to the table kid. All of it. Bait. Get out, she said. Elias got out. The door closed behind him. The car, too expensive for the road, crunched away down the snow, and Sabine stood in the study shaking while Ambrose Vane watched her with those calm, old eyes. I almost did it. Her voice cracked. I almost said yes, if you hadn't. She stopped, pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I almost lost everything. In week 1. Because somebody smiled at me. Yes, Vane said. He didn't soften it. That's supposed to make me feel better. No. He crossed to her. It's supposed to teach you something. So listen. He waited until she dropped her hands. In this world, Sabine loyalty is often rented, not bought. Rented. A man can be on your side completely, right up until someone pays for a different side. His voice gentled, just slightly. You'll meet 100 Elias Marchettis if you keep walking this road. The trick isn't never trusting anyone. The trick is knowing that everyone has a price written somewhere, and learning to read it, before they spend you. Sabine wiped her face, nodded. It was a hard lesson. It would not be the last one. Because the next morning, Roland Sterling stopped playing quiet. It started small. A transaction Sabine tried to make was declined. Then another. A bank that had processed her last buy without blinking suddenly couldn't, wouldn't. Sent back a polite note about a review of the account. Then another bank. Then a third. He's noticed, Vane said grimly, reading the notices. Not who you are, but that someone is moving on his debt. He's felt the pressure, and he's swinging at the dark. By midday, it was worse. A legal complaint had been filed. Public, splashy, accusing an unnamed investor of attempting to manipulate the debt structure of Sterling Holdings. No name yet. Roland didn't have the name, but he had lawyers, and lawyers were bloodhounds. And the longer this went, the closer they'd get. The doors were closing, one by one, the exact thing Sabine had spent her whole life feeling. Except now it was happening with money, and the stakes were a company, and a father's memory, and a grandfather's last wish. 20 days left, then 19. She sat up late in the study, the letter spread on the desk in front of her, reading her grandfather's words again, like they might tell her something new. Vane came in near midnight, poured 2 glasses from a bottle on the shelf, set one down beside her. Whiskey. She was 22. Vane knew that. The glass was a gesture, not an offer. A way of saying, I'm sitting with you in this. It's slipping, Sabine said. Every door he closes, I've got fewer ways through. And the clock. She shook her head. 19 days. Maybe it's not possible. Maybe he set it up so it was never possible. Vane was quiet a moment. Your grandfather didn't choose you because this would be easy, he said. She looked up, and Vane met her eyes, steady, certain. He chose you because of what you don't have. Every door Roland's closing, he's closing it the way you'd close a door on somebody real. Somebody with a reputation to protect, assets to freeze, a name to ruin. A pause. You don't have any of that. You're a ghost. You came out of a foster home a week ago with a backpack and $1. There is nothing for him to freeze, nothing for him to ruin. He's swinging at someone who isn't there. Sabine stared at him. Stop fighting him in the daylight, Vane said. That's his country. The banks, the courts, the public complaints. That's where he's king. He leaned forward. Go where he can't follow. Go quiet. Go small. Buy the debt through a dozen tiny vehicles. None of them connected. None of them loud. Let him swing at shadows in the light. While in the dark, piece by piece, you take the floor out from under him. Something opened in Sabine's chest. Something like hope. She didn't quite trust it, but she held on to it. Quiet, she said. Quiet, Vane agreed. Margaret, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands, spoke up then. A root doesn't shout that it's growing, she said. You don't even know it's there, until one day the whole tree just is. She folded the towel. Roland's up there in his tower waving his arms at the weather. Let him. You be the root. So they went quiet. For the next 2 weeks, Sabine Rourke disappeared into the dark and went to work. No more big moves, no more single deals that lit up the board. Instead, dozens of small ones. Scattered across a web of private vehicles, Vane helped her build each one too small to notice each one buying up another sliver of Sterling Holdings debt. A loan here, a bond there, patient, invisible, like water finding every crack in a wall. Roland kept fighting the ghost in the daylight, froze accounts that didn't matter, chased a complaint against an investor who didn't exist, spent his lawyer's hours and his own attention swinging at a shadow, and underneath him in the dark, the floor kept disappearing. Sabine barely slept. She'd work the deals at night, drive Milo to school in the gray morning, come back and work again. She lost weight. Her eyes went hollow. Vane told her more than once to rest. She didn't, because there was a clock, and a father in the ground who'd never gotten the chance, and a boy down the hall who deserved a world where the right people won. Milo, for his part, watched all of it with those two big eyes. The kid was smart, smarter than the system had ever credited. He didn't understand the details, but he understood the shape of it, that Sabine was fighting something big and tiring herself out, and carrying it mostly alone. So Milo did what he could. He made toast in the mornings, badly, burnt on one side, cold in the middle, and he slid the bigger piece across the table to Sabine, because he'd seen her do it for him 100 times, and figured that was just what you did, for someone you. He never finished that sentence, even to himself, but he made the toast, and one night Sabine found the kid asleep in the study chair, waiting up for her, a blanket pulled to his chin, and she stood there in the doorway looking at him, and felt the whole weight of why she was doing this settle right into the center of her chest. She carried Milo up to bed, tucked the blanket around him, stood at the window he loved and looked out at the snow, and made herself a quiet promise in the dark. She was going to win this, not for the money, for the boy who made bad toast and waited up, so he would never ever have to know what the cold felt like again. The seed sat in its little glass vial on the study shelf the whole time. She looked at it sometimes when the work got heavy. A seed doesn't argue with winter. It just waits. And when it's ready, it comes up through the frozen ground like the cold was never even there. Then, with 11 days left, Roland Sterling found Milo. Sabine would never know exactly how. A school record, maybe. A trail back through the provisional guardianship paperwork. Roland had lawyers, and lawyers were bloodhounds, and somewhere in the chase for the ghost, they'd stumbled onto the one thing that wasn't a shadow, the boy. But Roland didn't do what she'd braced for. There was no threat, no black car outside the school, no man in a suit grabbing Milo by the arm. Sabine had spent her whole life ready for that kind of danger, the loud kind, the kind you can see coming and put your body in front of. This was worse, because what arrived on a quiet Tuesday delivered by courier to the Glass Palace was a folder, and inside the folder was a petition. Roland Sterling and his wife Beatrice Sterling had filed for guardianship of a 9-year-old minor named Milo. Sabine read it 3 times. The words wouldn't go in. "I don't." She looked up at Vane, the page shaking in her hand. "I don't understand. He wants Milo. Why would he want Milo? He doesn't even know Milo." And then she understood, all at once, the way a person understands the trap only after the jaws have already shut. "It's a weapon," she said. Her voice had gone hollow. "He found the one thing I'd actually fight for, and he's not threatening it." She laughed, a horrible, breathless sound. "He's offering it a better home." Vane took the folder, read it himself. His jaw tightened. "It's elegant," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I'll give the devil that. He can't find the ghost moving on his debt, but he found the boy the ghost loves, and he doesn't have to do a single thing that's illegal. He just has to be better. On paper." Sabine looked at him. "A wealthy married couple," Vane went on. "A stable home, mansions, the best schools, versus," he gestured at the page, "an unemployed 22-year-old on a provisional arrangement, with a permanent hearing in weeks currently living in a borrowed house, who hasn't slept in 3 weeks, in front of a family court judge." His voice was grim. "Roland looks like a gift, Sabine. He looks like the answer to a prayer." And I look like a kid who can't take care of him." The words came out flat. Dead. She sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped working, because here was the trap, and it was perfect. She could keep fighting for the company, pour every hour and every ounce of herself into the dark work of buying debt and taking back what Roland stole, win her father's memory, win her grandfather's last wish, or she could fight for the boy. But she couldn't do both, not in 11 days. There wasn't enough of her. There wasn't enough time. Every hour she spent in family court building her case to keep Milo was an hour she wasn't spending on the company, and every hour on the company was an hour Roland's lawyers spent making her look to a judge like exactly what the system had always said she was: unstable, unfit, a leftover trying to raise a leftover. Choose, said the trap. The company, or the boy. You can't have both. And the worst part, the part that made her hands shake on the desk, she knew which one her grandfather would tell her to choose. The letter was right there. Take back what he stole. 30 days. The company. The father's memory. The thousands of livelihoods. The whole point of everything. But it wasn't a contest. Not really. Not for one single second. Because Sabine looked down the hall toward the room where a skinny kid with messy brown hair was asleep behind a window full of snow, and she knew there was no version of this where she handed Milo to the man who had destroyed his own brother. None. She'd burn the company down first. He thinks I'll choose the money, Sabine said quietly. She looked up at Vane, and something had gone very still and very clear in her eyes. Roland, he thinks I'm him. He thinks anyone faced with $50 million and a whole company on one side and a foster kid on the other. He thinks they pick the money. Vane said nothing. He doesn't understand. Sabine's voice was steady now. He's never understood. That's his whole problem, isn't it? He thinks everyone has a price. A breath. He thinks Milo is a price. And in that moment, something hardened in Sabine that would never soften again. Not anger. Anger was too small for it. This was bedrock. She would not become Roland. She would not trade a child for a company, whatever happened in the next 11 days, even if she lost everything. Even if the trust dissolved and the money vanished and Roland won the whole empire. She was keeping the boy. That was the floor. That was the thing underneath everything else that did not move. But God, she was so tired. And the trap was so good. And 11 days was so few. She didn't see a way through. She honestly didn't. That was the night Margaret found her at the bottom of the stairs. Sabine hadn't made it up to bed. She'd sat down on the third step meaning to rest for a minute. And the minute had turned into an hour. And she was still sitting there, head in her hands. Not crying, past crying, just empty. Margaret sat down beside her, slow the way older bones sit. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat, shoulder to shoulder with the girl on the cold stone step. I used to find your father right here, Margaret said finally, on this exact step, when he was small and the world got too big for him. A soft sound, almost a laugh. He'd get so tangled up in a thing he couldn't fix. He'd just sit down wherever he was standing, like his legs gave out from all the thinking. Sabine didn't lift her head. He's going to take Milo, she said into her hands, and I can't stop him and win the company both. There isn't enough of me, Margaret. There was never enough of me. There's never been enough of me for anything my whole life. Margaret was quiet a moment. Then she reached over and put one weathered hand flat on Sabine's back, and she didn't rub it or pat it. She just left it there, warm, steady, the way you'd hold your hand against the earth to feel if something was still growing. You listen to me, Margaret said, and her voice was low and it did not waver. I have buried a husband. I have buried friends. I buried the boy I helped raise. And I have kept his empty house warm for 18 years, waiting for a granddaughter I wasn't sure I'd live to see. A breath. So I know a thing or two about not enough, and I am going to tell you the truth about it. Sabine lifted her head. Just enough. There has always been enough of you, Margaret said. The world just kept taking it before you could see it for yourself. She looked at Sabine, and her old eyes were fierce and wet. You feed that boy the big half every single morning while your own stomach growls. You think that's not enough child that is the most anyone in this frozen family ever gave anyone. Your grandfather couldn't do it. Your father tried, and the world killed him for it. And here you are, 22, broke, half-starved, doing it every day without even noticing. It's remarkable. Sabine's throat closed. You are not enough, Margaret said. You are the first Sterling in 3 generations who understood what the money was even for. And Sabine, who had not cried at the reading of the will, who had not cried reading a dead grandfather's apology, put her face against the old woman's shoulder, there on the cold stone step, and let it out, just for a minute, just where nobody could see. And Margaret held the back of her head with one hand, the way you hold something you will never let fall. There's a way through, Margaret said into her hair. There's always a way through. You're just too tired right now to see it. So you rest, and in the morning, we look again. Together. Sabine slept that night. Really slept. For the first time in 3 weeks. And it was almost as if the rest cleared something. Because it was that very night past midnight that the phone rang. A number she didn't know. She almost didn't answer. But something made her pick it up. Rourke. The voice on the other end was quiet, strained. It took her a second to place it. Elias Marchetti. She sat up. You've got a lot of nerve. Just listen, please. And something in the please stopped her, because Elias Marchetti did not say please. Elias was charm and confidence and easy smiles. This voice was none of those things. This voice sounded like a man who hadn't slept either. I know what he's doing with the kid, Elias said. I know about the petition. Her grip tightened on the phone. How do you... Because I still hear things. From his side. A pause. A breath that shook. I need to tell you something. And then I need to give you something. And after that, you'll never hear from me again. Sabine said nothing. Waited. When I took his money, Elias said, I told myself it was just business. That's what we all say. Just business. Loyalty's rented. Right, I think I even said that to you. A bitter sound. I've done a lot of just business in my life, Rourke. Walked a lot of people into a lot of bad rooms. Never lost sleep over one of them. Then why are you calling me at midnight? A long silence. Because I have a daughter. The words landed strange in the dark. She's grown now, but I wasn't there when she was small. Long story. Bad story. She spent some years in the system Rourke. Group homes. The whole thing. While I was off doing just business. His voice caught. When I heard what Roland was doing, going after your boy, using a foster kid as a chip in a poker game. The bitter sound again, raw this time. Something in me just stopped. I've done a lot of things. I can't do that one. Sabine was very still. He keeps everything, Elias said. Roland, every dirty thing he writes it down, because he thinks the writing protects him. Accounts, transfers, the shell companies, the money he's been pulling out of Sterling Holdings for years, and hiding offshore where the board can't see it. A pause. And something else, something older, from back when your father died. Sabine stopped breathing. I had access to some of it, Elias said, while I worked for him. I kept copies. Insurance, I told myself. Everybody keeps insurance. What are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying I'm about to send you everything. The accounts, the transfers, the offshore structure. Proof that Roland Sterling has been stealing from his own company for years. A breath. And a file. About the night your father died. I don't know everything that's in it. I never had the stomach to read it all. But your uncle kept it Rourke, whatever it is. He kept it. And men like Roland only keep the things that could bury them. Sabine closed her eyes. The man who tried to feed her to the wolf, calling at midnight, to hand her the knife instead. Because somewhere out there was a grown daughter who'd spent years in the cold, and a father who'd finally too late decided he couldn't help build one more cold place for one more child. Loyalty is often rented, Vane had said, but this wasn't rented. Nobody was paying Elias Marchetti for this. This was something else. This was the thing that lived underneath the price, in the part of a person the money never quite reaches. Why? Sabine said. Why give it to me? You could sell it. You could... Because you didn't yell at me. Sabine opened her eyes. That day in the study, when you caught me. Elias's voice was soft now, almost wondering. I've been caught before, Rourke. People scream. They threaten. They tell you what kind of garbage you are. And you know what? They're usually right. A pause. You just looked at me, and you said, get out, quiet, like you were disappointed, like you'd expected better of me. A long breath. Nobody's expected better of me in a long time. I keep thinking about that, so consider it my resignation from the just business life. A pause. Watch your phone. The line went dead. Sabine sat in the dark study, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to nothing. And then her phone buzzed. Once, a file arriving. She opened it with shaking hands, scrolled and scrolled. Account numbers, wire transfers, dates, amounts, shell companies linked like beads on a string, all of them tracing back in the end to one name. Roland Sterling. Years of it. Millions of it. Money pulled quietly out of the company her grandfather had built. Money that should have gone to the workers and the projects and the people Sterling Holdings was supposed to serve. Siphoned off into the dark and hidden across an ocean. And then at the bottom, a second file. Older. Named only with a date. The date her father died. She hovered over it. Her thumb would not move, because she'd waited 22 years to know. And now that the knowing was one tap away, she found she was afraid of it. The way you're afraid of a door you've knocked on your whole life, right when it finally starts to open. She heard a floorboard behind her, turned. Margaret stood in the doorway in her robe, woken by the light. She looked at Sabine's face, and then at the phone in Sabine's hand, and she understood the way she seemed to understand everything. Is that... Margaret couldn't finish. He kept a file, Sabine said. Roland, about the night my father died. Her voice shook. It's right here, Margaret. 22 years, and it's right here, and I can't. I can't make myself... Margaret crossed the room, slow, and she didn't take the phone. She just put both hands over Sabine's, folding them closed around it. Warm old hands over young shaking ones. Not tonight, Margaret said gently. Some doors you don't walk through alone at 3 a.m. on no sleep. That truth has waited 18 years. It will wait until the sun's up and Ambrose is at the table, and I've got coffee in you. She squeezed. You don't have to be brave by yourself anymore, child. That's the whole point of not being alone. You forgot, but I'll keep reminding you. Sabine let out a breath that shook her whole body, and she set the phone down, face up, the file still waiting on the screen. But no longer demanding. She didn't have a way through the trap yet. 11 days. The clock still running. The boy still on the table. The doors still closing one by one. But for the first time in days, Sabine Rourke wasn't looking at a wall. She was looking at a weapon. And she wasn't looking at it alone. She pressed her hand flat against her jacket pocket, where one folded dollar still sat. The first thing her grandfather had ever given her, proof that an old man in the mountains had known she existed and had reached toward her the only way he dared. Then she reached up and covered Margaret's hand with her own, and the two of them stood there a moment in the glowing glass palace, an old woman who'd kept a house warm for 18 years, and a girl who'd finally come home to it, down in the city, in an office that wasn't really his. Roland Sterling slept soundly, certain he'd already won, certain the girl would take the bait, certain everyone in the end had a price. He had no idea the ghost had a name now. He had no idea the name had a face, and the face had a backpack and a dead father and a borrowed glass palace full of his own brother's secrets. He had no idea that a man he'd bought and discarded had just handed that face the one thing that could burn it all down. And he had no idea, none, what was coming for him. Down the hall behind a window full of falling snow, Milo slept, and Sabine sat up the rest of the night. Not alone this time. Margaret beside her and coffee on the stove, and Ambrose Vane called down before dawn, because the clock was running, and she had a company to take back, a boy to keep, a father to answer for, and $1 to return to the man who'd thought it was an insult. 10 days to go,